Hey guys, welcome again to React 201. Uh, we have Ali today teaching this workshop. He's a fourth year computer science student with a lot of experience. So I'm gonna let him take it away from here.
Okay, sweet. Thank you. Hi everybody. My name's Ali. I will be guiding you through the introduction of React today. Yeah, I think we can get started. This will be a very practical approach. So like every concept that I introduce, we're gonna run through a quick few demos, just so we can kind of get a feel of it in real person or like in actual code instead of just in a boring lecture style. So the first thing we need is create React app. I'll leave these two commands up here that we're going to have to do. So we're going to do them right now. npm install dash dash global create React app. Go ahead and run this. It will download a package for Node.js. Make sure you guys have Node.js installed. A way to check is just to do npm-v and node-v. And if either of these give you an error, then you don't have Node installed. You can go and install Node at nodejs.org and then just hit 14.5.5, not the newest version. We want LTS, which is the most stable version. So yeah, make sure you have those installed and then run this command. And then once you do that, you can run npx. Notice the x, not m. npx. This will get installed with Node. And then create React app. And then you can name the app whatever you want. It'll create a folder with that name. These two commands will be available at the top of the slides here for a little while, just so you can refer to them. So once you do that, you can use any command line you want: PowerShell, Bash, Windows command prompt, Ubuntu, whatever command prompt you want. It'll all work. So npx create React app, and then the name of the app, and then you hit enter, and it'll take a while. It's going to take a few minutes to do all this. We can just leave it in the background, and we'll come back to that. Again, these two the commands you need to run are right up here. They'll be here for a few slides, so you can just look at them if you forgot them. So let's talk about what React is. So React is a very popular JavaScript framework that will combine your HTML and your CSS. So you don't have to do HTML anymore. It's a purely JavaScript way to create web pages. Um, it comes with its own syntax. The syntax is called JSX, which is the combination of that HTML and your JavaScript. It is not JavaScript. Your browser does not understand JSX. It needs to be compiled, and there are some very fancy compilers that do this for you. So here we can see our very first kind of React code, what it might look like. So this is just a default function in JavaScript. And then here you can put some JavaScript code, and what you return kind of looks like HTML here. This doesn't look like JavaScript, it looks like HTML. This is your JSX part, and it'll get compiled. And so the compiler that does this, all this magic, is called Babel, and we can see what Babel looks like. So here we're gonna write the same function we had. So we can do console.log hello, and then we can do return this. So this is kind of like a live viewing of what the compiler will do in the background. And then here we can return a div, and inside of that div, we can return a p tag with hello inside of it. And let's close off the p tag. And we can kind of see, so this is what your code translates into. This is what actually shows up in your browser, something that is JavaScript. It's something that your browser can understand. So we can see here these comments, but the kind of HTML that you put into it, the JSX, gets compiled into these react.createElement calls. And then there's the type, the props, which we'll discuss later, and then the message. And as you can see, the message of this div is another component. So this is kind of how the nesting works. This is just a quick demo to get you guys to understand the difference between JSX and JavaScript. JSX gets compiled into JavaScript, and it is not understood by your browsers, which is why we need the compilers. Um, So let's get into our first concept. Because you're no longer writing HTML, there's a concept, rendering. So this is how your code gets turned into a into an HTML page your browser can read. Whatever code you write will get rendered by React. And this rendering happens once when you load the page. When the page first gets loaded up, your page will get rendered. And here we can see what that rendering would look like. So if this is our app right here, we have like a variable and we have an array. And then inside of our JSX part, we can put that variable. So here inside of curly braces, whatever you put in curly braces in your um, JSX part, it'll turn it into JavaScript. So here we'll get the number 10, and then +5 equals, and then myvar +5. So here again, this is JavaScript inside the curly braces, and it gets converted into React. So we have 10 plus 5 equals 15. So we can see that right here. I see the comments. I will get to that real quick. Actually, Patrick gave out the commands. Those are correct. Yeah, you can trust Patrick. And then here we can see my array. So if you pass in an array, arrays don't look too pretty, right? It just looks like 1, 2, 3 pushed up once against each other. So we can do some fancy stuff with arrays later, but this is how your code gets like, or this is how you can render your JavaScript into your HTML. And this is the big powerful thing about React. It's that since they're on the same page, you can, or in the same code, you can combine them. So we have our JavaScript here. Yeah, the Stormhacks website is completely coded in React and just JavaScript. And we can look at the code base a little bit if we have time at the end and kind of see everything in practice. But yeah, so this is rendering. Um, so here's another concept, the VDOM tree. So V stands for virtual DOM, document object model, and tree is kind of how it's structured. So if you kind of think about this context right here, this thing right here, we have a div with a P in it and another div with another P in it and a span in it. And this is kind of what it looks like on the inside of React. It looks like this tree that we build top down. Have you tried, make sure that, here, let me put out make sure that you can run this command first. If that gives you an error, then you don't have npm installed. Also, if you're having permission issues, always try sudo. And if it's not working, try close your command line, open it again. If you just installed Node. Also for Linux, installing Node might be a little bit more complicated than just downloading something. But yeah, let me know if you guys have trouble with that. So anyway, back to this tree idea. So we have, this is how it's structured in the backend, and this will become like, this isn't something you need to like actively know. It's just something to keep in mind when you get specific errors like, oh, why shouldn't this work? It's because it's a tree. So one kind of exception to React is everything must have one parent. So here we have this div, which contains everything inside of it. But here at the bottom, we try to put two p tags right next to each other. And this won't work because a tree can't have two roots. It needs to have a single root. So if you get errors like this, it's because you're trying to create more than one root inside of an element. So every element must return a single item. And the reason is because it's a tree. So we had the concept of rendering, which is how you load the page. But then we kind of need it to be able to re-render. We need to be able to update information on the page. And we'll get into how that works in a second, and how we can tell React, hey, this just changed. Can you re-render the page for me? I need this to update. So let's build our first thing, and it's going to be a broken timer, and we'll get to fixing it right after this. Don't worry, this isn't like a math, like, oh wow, you guys don't know how to code thing. No, we'll fix it right away. So once you guys have installed this, and hopefully it's working, and you get to this page, you can go into the folder and you can run and you can open VS Code there, or whatever text editor you want to open there. Code dot will simply open VS Code in that folder. So you can open VS Code, and this is how we're gonna. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, cool. All right, my headphones seem to have glitched for a second. Um, yeah, sorry. So when you open VS Code, how did I navigate to this? You open your favorite text editor inside of the folder that you named the thing. So we named it demo. So inside of wherever you run that command, it'll create a folder demo. And inside of that folder will be all the code that relates to this React project. So this is the folder demo opened in VS Code. And then inside of that folder, there's a source. So if we were to do it strictly through command line, we would cd into src. And then here, we can see that there's this app.js. This is the main folder you care about. So yeah, that's how you get to this app.js folder or code file. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete everything except the div. Remember, we can only return one thing, so let's leave the div there. And we're going to get rid of the class name as well. We'll get into CSS later. We'll delete all the imports, and now we're left with something that looks kind of similar to what you guys saw earlier. So it's very simple, and we'll start with that. So the first thing we're going to build is kind of a dummy timer. So let's go up here. And so there's this function in React or in JavaScript called set interval. Oops, interval, if you guys remember that function. And so it takes in two things. Thing number one is a function. So we're going to write a function here, and this is a function, right? It's curly braces, or just in case people don't know, square, or sorry, just brackets, and then arrow equal sign less than, and then curly braces. So this is how we write a function. And then next to that, the second parameter will be the timeout. So we'll set it to 100 milliseconds. Uh, Jalen, I think you might be running out of space on your computer. I'm not sure about that warning or error. That might be a space issue because Node.js is quite a big program. But anyway, so this set interval right here will run the code inside of it every 100 milliseconds. So inside of here, or sorry, outside of here, we want to create a timer variable. Timer equals 0. And then inside of here, let's increment timer every time. And then let's display the timer variable in our code. So let's kind of, and then just for fun, we're going to console log it as well so that we know it's updating. And we'll also console log it outside of the thing. And here maybe we'll add a little something to the console log so that we know it's the other one. And then we'll start this. So the way to access example. So if we go back to where you guys ran your, so this is the folder you ran the npx command in. You can do cd into demo. So this is the name that you gave the project. So when you did npx create React app, this is the name you gave the demo. You go, or you name the project. So you go into here, and then inside of here, you can open code with like VS Code if that's your favorite text editor. But if not, you can cd into source and open, like let's say you're a Vim user or something, you can open app.js using Vim if you cd into source. So that's where the actual code exists. So if you're using Vim, which is a text editor on command line, you can go into there. But if you open VS Code like I did showed in a set of right then in the source folder there's this app.js folder, and that's where your code is. That's the entry point to your code. Yeah, I can make it bigger. Uh, oops. All right. So let's kind of collapse this a little bit. Let's go into our demo here. Oh yeah, we need to start the app, right? We need to. So inside of here, inside of demo, not source, inside of demo, to start up development, you want to do npm start. npm start. This is how you start the server, which will hot refresh it'll recompile and reshow your code every time you make a change. So if we do npm start, we'll get this. If you have a permission issue, use sudo npm start if you're on Linux, but this should work on Windows. And so we get the browser here, and this is our application, and it should look nothing like just an empty page with a 0 on it. And if we look at our console by pressing F12 or clicking inspect, we'll see that the timer is actually going. It's just not updating. And I'll make this bigger too. So you can see timer is not going. It's a broken timer, even though it should theoretically work, right? This console print is updating. So timer is obviously getting updated. But what you might notice is that that very first print we had is never running again. It only ran once and it just gave up. And what we're seeing is this print right here. And so this is happening, just this isn't happening. So what's the cause of that? And that's the whole, we need to tell React, hey, can you re-render this for me, please? So let's get into that. So that brings us to hooks. And this is the key thing that was kind of invented a few years after React was released, because the old way of doing this wasn't as great. So hooks give you some interactive features that let you interact with React, the code base itself, the actual engine that's running your code. So the three most important ones, and chances are the only three you'll use in a hackathon, the only three I've ever used in a hackathon, are useState, useEffect, and useRef. And they all start with this use. So that's what a hook is. It's like you're using this hook. So useState is used to store a variable that will cause re-renders when you change its value, right? So that was just a normal JavaScript variable that wasn't working, but a useState hook will work. useEffect allows you to run code in certain conditions. So let's say we only want to run a code the very first time the component is rendered, or every time the component updates, or every time a certain variable updates, but not always. We can do that, and we'll see demos of this. And the third one is useRef, which is kind of a looser version of useState. It lets you keep a variable between renders. So if you think about each render, what's happening is it's going to run every line of code here every time they call this app, right? If they call your function, you'll run all this code. So like, let's say you keep a variable to 0, and then later on you change it. When the app gets re-rendered, your variable will go back to 0 because you'll redeclare it. So useRef lets you keep that variable in between renders. And we'll see an example of that too. So all hooks, and this is important, all hooks must be absolutely outside of any condition, any for loops, ifs loops, while loops. This is the fundamental rule of hooks. They must be outside of a condition. So for example, if we'll see useState in a second. If I do this, if 10 is less than 4, useState. If I do this, this is illegal. You cannot have a hook inside of a conditional, because if this condition flips from true to false or something, this will screw up with React's internal engine. So yeah, just very important, put these outside. And so the convention to keep that is always keep all of your hook calls at the very top of your function and then have everything else below that. So you know what all your hooks are right away and you know that they're not in a condition. So with that very important warning kept said, we can let's update this function to use a hook. So now instead of timer being a local variable, we want to store it in useState. UseState is a function from React. By the way, I have mine to auto import useState. If you don't, you'll have to include this line at the top. Import curly brace useState from React right here like this. And then useState is a function that you can call, and it will give you back two things. So you can create this as an array. It'll give you back the variable, let's call it timer, and a function you can use to update that variable. So let's call it set timer. The convention is usually to call it set and then whatever the variable is with a capital. And then so this equals useState. So now that we have that, um, so this is array destructuring, by the way. So if you wanted to do it like, if this doesn't make a lot of sense to you, think about it this way. Timer state is this, and then we're doing let timer equals timer state 0, and let set timer equals timer state 1. So this is the old JavaScript way to write it. JavaScript now has, and I'll leave this in comments just so everyone can see it. JavaScript now has array destructuring, so we can do timer, comma, set timer equal use state. And these are identical, like purely identical. It's just a different way to write it. And also you don't get this array object in this newer way to write it. So yeah, we're taking out the first item, the second item out of the array. So we can console log it, sure. So the one thing we got to change is we can no longer change the variable directly because that's not going to cause the re-render. What we need to do is set timer with the new value. So we can do timer plus 1. So because the old way was to do timer and now we're doing timer plus 1. And then we'll save this and we'll go back to our website. Oh, we got some nans going on. Let's see what's happening. Oh, we process nuked our thing. This is, I want to show this because, so this is actually not responding very well right now. It's kind of broken. That's because we kind of blew up the browser a little bit. This set interval gets created every single time. So you're creating a new timer every single time. So instead we want to use set timeout. And this will create one timer that waits 100 milliseconds and then updates the state. And then it stops. And then the next time you render, all your code gets run. And then you create a new timer that waits 100 seconds, updates the state. So every 100, so you create the timer every time. And of course, I broke that tab. So don't do that. There's a lot of ways you can get in trouble in React. So we just gotta make sure that we're not getting in trouble. Oh, one last thing I forgot. My mistake. So here's saying time. So we're getting a nan, obviously, and it's not exactly what we want. Why is that happening? Because useState will return you by default null. So you need to give it a default value. So if we kind of think about this as the old way, we're saying let timer equals null. So if we want to say let timer equals 0, which we had originally, we need to pass in to useState whatever we want our initial value to be. So 0 in this case. And so this would be the way to write let timer equals 0. And hopefully now, yes, we have one updating approximately 10 times per second. So let's refresh the browser. It still doesn't want to refresh because we kind of broke that one too. Yeah, okay, now we have a working demo. And we can see that both prints are happening. And so we're updating the value as we go along. And we have a working timer. So that's the reason we need to use state. We need to tell React. So every time we call this function, React is saying, okay, so they just changed the value. Let's re-render. So call this function again and see if anything changes. And then they'll see this timer becomes, the next number, and they'll notice that as a change and update it. So that's what React is doing in the background. So that's why we need use state. Any questions about use states? All right, cool. So components. So if we think about this app right here, this isn't very reusable, right? We're writing all our code in one place. So components are a way to write chunks of code, kind of like chunks of HTML, and then have it be repeatable. So we can recreate that chunk of code over and over again. So this is called a component. It's tightening up a bunch of data and having it and logic and having that be reusable. And we'll see an example of this. So we can create our own components as well as our normal HTML tags, right? So these p tags and div tags are normal HTML tags, and just like that, inside of this area here, we can create, like, we can call my component. Now, of course, this won't work because I haven't created it, but we can call our own thing right here. And the way that React will know it's different is because we'll use a capital letter instead of a lowercase letter. So this will notice this capital and say, so this is a user component, not an HTML tag. So that's it starts with an uppercase. We often use Pascal case. We kind of treat these like classes in a way. So we use Pascal case. Just a quick side, if you guys don't know the different naming cases here, they are. Yeah, we use Pascal case to name components. And then we can also pass data from so like, let's say we have our component that takes in a bunch of data. We need to be able to pass it into it. So if you think about this, let's take a Reddit message as an example. The data it has is the message, the user, the number of votes it has, and how old the comment is. And if you think about the logic inside of it, you can click upvote, downvote, share. There's more stuff like you can click, you can add an award and block the user and view their profile and all that. Those are actions, but this is just a few examples. This isn't a complete list. So we need to get this data, right? Because each comment will have a unique message. So we can take these in as a prop. So let's go to that example. So here, let's write. So we're going to write another function, and we're going to do it in the arrow way. So we'll call it message equals, and then empty brackets. And so this is a function, right? We're taking in 0 parameters and returning nothing right now. And inside of here, we'll return a div, and inside of that div, we'll have a p tag. And then, so we want to return here. We want to return our message. So for now, let's just say let message equal hello world, something like that, and then we'll return message. So in here, we can call message just like that. So we type it inside of these brackets, these HTML brackets. And so what that should do is it should create an instance of message. So if we look at this, we can see it right here, hello world, and the timer is still going nuts. So we can close that. We can see our component here. And if we inspect the DOM tree, if we look at what it looks like, we can see we have our div. So this div right here is this div right here. Inside of it, we have a p tag, which is the timer, and we have another div and another p tag. So the timer right here, and this thing we created, this component, just gets converted into whatever it returns. And that's the beauty of React. It introduces nothing into your HTML except what you want to render. And so in this case, we want to render this. And so can we have more messages? So instead of copy pasting the whole chunk of HTML, we can just kind of copy paste this line of code a few times, and we'll get a few more messages. right? And so now we haven't taken in message, right? We don't have a unique message for each guy. So that's the next thing we can do. So there's this parameter that we get called props. So every message except app, which is which is a component itself that doesn't receive anything, every component will take in one parameter and only one parameter called props. So props is just short for properties, and it's a list of all of the kind of HTML tags that are passed into it. And we'll see that in a sec. But now instead of doing this let message locally, we can do props.message, right? And so if we do this right now, we'll see nothing show up. And that's because props.message is actually undefined. So if we console log this, and we can, let's get rid of this timer now so that we don't have it spamming um, our console. So now if we do this and refresh the page, we get 4 undefineds, and that's for each of these. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we get 4 undefineds. So we need to pass that in. So here we can write message equals, and then whatever we want. So let's say message equals hello here, and I'm just gonna do this to speed things up. And then here we can do world, goodbye, world again. And so now if we hit re-render or hit Control S, it'll save, it'll re-render on the front end. You can always refresh if you think things aren't working. And we get a unique message in each one. So this is props. So it's an object and it has these properties. So if we, we can pass in a different one like ID equals 1, and then here we can do props.id, right? So whatever we write here will show up here in our component. So now if we refresh this, we get a 1 and 3 undefineds. So now let's say we only want to render something if it exists. So let's say we have a user name, but somehow our backend screws up and a couple people don't have usernames. And this guy will have a username of pilot. Um, so we can have another p tag here. And if we show our, and we can do props dot username. And so this isn't very great. So we get pilot, hello, and then world, goodbye, world. So we can't really tell who's the user and who's the, maybe we can change this up to make it a little bit different. So if we use H6, this will actually be smaller than a p tag. So we can see this is pilot, hello, world, goodbye. But still, we don't want to render, let's say we don't want to render a message unless we know who it's from. So we can do this with conditional rendering. And so inside of here, remember, if we use curly braces, we put JavaScript inside of it. We can do props dot and then some property like user. And then we put this special and percent or 2 ampersand. So this is a JavaScript and then we can do inside of here, after this and, we can render a component. So let's just take all this, or let's just take the inner part and put it here. And we'll get the error again that a tree cannot have more than one root. So we need to wrap this in another div and put this here. And then of course we need to wrap the original thing in a div. And so let's have that pretty flag for that. So now we can see it's saying if props.user exists, and I screwed that up, it should be username. If props.username and this thing. So this is called conditional rendering. This ampersand is called conditional rendering. So you're saying if this thing exists, then print this to the screen or render this to the screen. So now we can see only one guy showed up, and I'll refresh this. So we can see only one guy showed up. The other guys didn't render anything. They didn't even render the message, and that's because this returned false. And so they didn't run this code. So this is called conditional rendering. It's a cool feature in React if you ever need to conditionally render something if only under a certain condition. And so you can nest things too. You can do like if true, or if cond1 and cond2 and cond3, as long as you have this last one here and then you do the HTML. So you can have multiple conditions. But yeah, this is called user.name. Sorry, props.username. So yeah, this is called conditional rendering. Any state or any questions about that? So what we just covered, we covered props, creating your own components, passing in the props, and conditional rendering. What's Unimic? Oh, unmute mic. Yeah, sure. We can let that. Just are I don't know, Revic, are they allowed to?
If you're okay with it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
If you're only if you're okay with being recorded on YouTube, because this is going to go on YouTube. But that's just my warning. But if you are okay with it, yeah, you are allowed to. All right. So if no questions, we will. How do you organize the div? What do you mean? Oh, yeah. So I have, I guess this is a quick aside. I have a lot of VS Code extensions installed that do a lot of things for me. The one you're looking for that, this is a comment about how does it automatically format things. So like if I misformat stuff and put extra spaces and extra um, things, it'll automatically go back to default formatting. It's called Prettier. It's a code formatter it saves your life. It's great. But yeah, I use Prettier to automatically format all my code. So I write really messy code and then press Control S and it's magic for me. But yeah, so yeah, that's components and conditional rendering. Let's look at some events. So in HTML, if you remember, you can have a button and you can do on click and you pass in a function and it'll that'll happen. Same thing here, except now they're in one page, so you can have the function and the button created in the same code page. So that's a little bit nicer. So let's create an example around that. We're going to create an example called upvote downvote, which is, you may be seeing a theme I'm building to here of Reddit comments, but anyway, we're going to keep going here. So we're going to change this message to voteable message. And then here we're going to change these to votable message. Is props like I in range? No, props is an object with these properties in it. So you can kind of think about me calling votable message with an object inside of it, and then user name equaling to something, and then what was the other one? Message equaling to something else. So you're passing in this object, so that's only one parameter, and then it has these properties in it. Oops. So let's do votable message. So we're going to need some states. So let's create a few states. Also, side tip, pro tip, if you're using states, use a const variable instead of a let variable, and that'll stop you from accidentally changing the variable. So we're going to create one called likes, and then comma set likes equals to a use state, and it'll be a 0 by default. Right, so this is your default parameter. It provides you with the variable itself and a way to set the variable that'll cause a re-render. And we want a second one, and we'll call it dislikes and set dislikes. And so now we have two states right here. And then we're going to create some functions that will do this stuff, that'll increase our likes and decrease or increase our dislikes. So we'll do const, we'll create some functions. So we'll call it upvote, and then it'll take nothing in, and it will do set likes plus 1. So this is simply just an upvote function. It's not doing, we're not calling it yet, so but never used, it hasn't been used yet. And then we'll copy paste this, and we'll call it downvote, and this will set our dislikes to dislikes plus 1. And then let's render this on the page. So right under the message, we'll put a button. So let's create a button, and this will be our dislike button. And then we'll create a span, which is kind of like a div, and this will be our votes. So let's think about the math here. I don't want to screw it up. It should be likes minus dislikes and not the other way around. Um, so yeah, we're just taking how many likes the comment has and how many dislikes it has. And then we'll create another button under that and we'll call it likes or like. Um, so now we need to pass in the on click. So here we can do on click equals and then curly braces because we're running some JavaScript. And inside of it, we'll pass in the name of this function right here. So downvote. And now we can see the warning went away. We're now using this function, and that's because we're using it here. So similarly, on this one, we can do on click and then upvote. So now we have our two functions, and when we click on this button, it should run this code, and when we click on this one, it should run this code. Let's see what that looks like in action. So now we can see this here, and I might have screwed that up. Oh, I set likes twice. There we go. So this should be set dislikes, right? So dislikes should be incrementing by 1. This one should be incrementing likes by 1. So now hopefully with the correct one, there we go. So now it works, right? We're incrementing and decrementing the number. And so we can see the on-click handlers are working. And we can get rid of this console. So we can see these on-click handlers working. So this is when we click on this button, it'll run this piece of code. Yeah. So any questions about that? Being able to, so you can update states and stuff like that inside of here. So any questions about anything related to that? All right, cool. So let's get into the component lifecycle. So that I brought this up before, being able to access stuff at certain points. So there's 5 different points in the lifecycle. So there's component will mount, which is right before the component has been rendered onto the page. There's component will update, which is right before it gets re-rendered. So right before the new version of it will go on. Component did mount, which is right after the component rendered onto the page. So mounting is called rendering, and updating is re-rendering. And I just realized I mispronounced or misspelled. Oh, I didn't actually. Just kidding. Okay, so and there's component did update. So after every time it updates, you can run certain code. And then before the component is destroyed, component will unmount. So this is right before you unrender the page. And you can access all of these with the next hook, use effect. So use effect, here's the syntax. It takes in a function and it takes in an array as its second argument. And this is called the dependency array. And the way it works is it will run this function only when this dependency array changes. So any of the variables inside of this array changes. And there are 2 edge cases for dependency array. Edge case number 1 is that you pass in an empty array. So you're saying update never, pretty much. Don't look for any variable changes. So this is component did mount. It'll run once and never again. So we saw those console prints printing every time the component updated, right? If we don't want that, right? Let's say this is a network call saying user has logged in. You don't want to spam your server with user has logged in. So you would put it in here. And we'll see an example of this. Then we have edge case number 2, which is undefined. You don't even include this parameter. You just pass in a function and that's it. And this will act as component did update. So after an update, it will call this. So you will see that repeating loop. The differences between outside and inside, we'll see it. Outside is component will update and inside is component did update. So that's before and after a new render. So let's see some examples of the life cycle. So we're going to modify our vote system We built this in this way just so we can see all the use effect. So if you don't have it imported, go at the top, use effect, go ahead and import that. And then we're gonna just out here at the top, good practice, and with this doesn't return anything. Use effect doesn't return anything. So you just call the function. And then we pass in two parameters. The first one is a function, and the second one is our dependency array. So let's see edge case number one, empty dependency array. And we will console.log. And this should be, if I bring up my little cheat sheet so I don't forget which one is which, this should be component did mount. Component did mount. And then the next one is, so one last thing about use effect is you can clean up code. So you can pass back a function. So this is our return of our function, the function we're giving to use effect. We're returning something. The thing we return is another function. JavaScript loves functions. And this function gets called when this use effect is about to rerun. So right before it reruns, it'll call this function to clean up the old iteration. So remember that set interval example we had that like crashed the browser because it kept creating new instances? You can create a interval in here and then delete it in here. So that way there's only ever one set interval. But anyway, so inside of here, there should be console.log component did unmount. And then we should have so that's the first two. Let's create another use effect. So you can call this as many times as you want, because they can have different dependency arrays. So new function, and this time we will pass in no dependency array. So remember, that's the second edge case. You can ignore the dependency array. So here this should be console.log, and this should be component did update. And so that's that one. And then we can have another use effect. And here, let's actually use the dependency array, which is something you might want to actually do. And we'll do upvote. So likes, sorry, wrong keyword. So every time that the number of likes changes, it will run this code. And we'll say new like here. So that's all of the different ones. And so now we should be able to see this in action. So it's running a bunch of times. Oh, that's because it's running once for every one of these. So let's get rid of 3 of them. So we only have 1 right now so that we don't mess ourselves up. And so right off the bat, we can see a couple of prints. So we have component did mount and component did update. And so and I guess let's put one more console log in here to see more of the life cycle. So this is component will mount, and this is also component will update. So there we go. So now we have 3 different prints. So the very first print is component will mount. Then after it has finished mounting, we see did mount and did update. And this will all become very relevant in a second. I know that this seems like random information, but it will become relevant in a second. So component did mount, component did update. And so now let's click the like button and see what prints. Okay, so here we can see it happened again. This one happened again. And that's because component will update. It's about to update. And then we see this component did update. So that's this one right here, or sorry, this one right here. Component did update. And then we also see the new like. Now let's click dislike and see what happens. Okay, so we only see these two. So component will update and component did update. But because this dependency didn't change, the number of likes itself didn't change. The number of dislikes changed, the number of likes didn't. So that means that this stays the same. So this doesn't print because the number of likes didn't change. So that's the purpose of dependency arrays. And why is it an array? Because you can have multiple dependencies. So now if we have likes and dislikes, no matter which one we click, it'll print this new like, which is now a lie, right? Because this is not a new like. Um, but yeah, I guess dislike is a kind of like. Um, so yeah, that's the life cycle. And so why does it matter? It matters because of a different hook called useRef, which is our third hook. So useRef is another one that will return something. So we call useRef, and you don't have to pass anything in it. Also, we need to import useRef just like the other two. So make sure it's imported. So useRef, just like state, we can pass in an initial value, which will be an object, but we're just going to pass in null for now. And so if you ever, for whatever reason, need to access an actual DOM node, so this would be these actual div elements or the P or whatever it is. If you actually need access to that, then this is how you get access to that. You get access to that with this useRef. In React, you almost never need access to them. So that's, think about every time you consider using a ref, think, do I actually need a ref? One common example, which you guys might run into in a hackathon, is external libraries like the Google Maps API will require you to give them a node, will require a DOM node. And in that case, you do need a ref. So a common use case is to create a map ref. And you'll see this all over the place if you're using a Google Maps API. But anyway, we'll just call it ref for now. And so you can pass ref into an HTML element. So here it has this special property called ref. This isn't an HTML property, right? Those are like class, ID, style, stuff like that. Those are like default HTML properties. Ref isn't one of those, but it is one that we can use. And you pass it a ref. So this name might be a little bit confusing. Let's change it to my ref so that it's not the same thing. So we give it this myRef property. And so remember, this object can persist throughout different cycles. So now let's print this myRef in a few places. So we'll print it in here, and we'll print it in here. I won't replace these prints. I will um, I will print it right afterwards so that we can see which thing it's printing under. We'll print it right here. Okay, come on. And then we'll also print it right here. Sure. So let's refresh. So now we can see, and this is the big difference between the lifecycle and why you might need it. So we have component will mount and update, and you can see this is null. It has nothing in it yet. But after component did mount and component did update, you can see it has the div inside of it. And this is the HTML div that you might need to pass around to someone. So if you're using ref, keep that distinction apart. You will almost always need to put it inside of a use effect, whether it's a constant use effect, so it only renders once and you only grab it once. This is the most use case. Or if it's an updating ref, you can put it inside of a every update get a new ref. So yeah, that's use ref. And again, you should almost never need use ref except if an API calls for it or if you're doing something fancy. So if you ever think about, oh, I need to use document dot get element by ID, never do this in React. There is no reason to do it. If you absolutely need to do it, use a ref, and you can just put that ref on the same thing. So yeah, that's my note on refs and use state and the lifecycle hooks. So we can see the difference between the lifecycle is before and after a render. Before a render, this ref is pointing to nothing because the DOM node hasn't appeared on the page ref yet. But after a render, it has appeared on the page. So that's just a note on refs or on the lifecycle. So yeah, that's the, and then we can do some styling now, right? So you might have noticed throughout this whole example, I haven't used CSS or images yet. And those are some of the tougher things to do in React. React doesn't officially include a way for you to do styling. It has no purpose for that. Vue.js is a different framework that does do this for you. It has an implemented way, but React leaves it up to the user to choose. There are tons of ways to do it. These are 4 of the most popular. So there's normal CSS, which is in the beginning you might have seen at the top here, your code did something like import dot slash index dot css or app dot css, right? So it did this import here. So this is saying use this CSS file. This is a CSS file we want. There's CSS modules, which we'll get into in a second. There's styled components, which we won't cover, but just know these are options. And there's SAS, which stands for syntactically awesome style sheets, which is like it's a compiler for CSS that gives you a bunch of fancy features to make your CSS life much easier. But I don't use SAS, I use CSS modules. So we'll go over those right now. So if we open our folder again, and in here we have app.css, we want to rename this. Or you can create a new file, it doesn't matter. We're just going to rename this app.module.css. So this dot module, it declares a CSS file versus a module file. So this is a CSS module. And so inside of here, we can get rid of all of this and just create one thing, call it my class name. And then we can do color red. So this is CSS. If you have never seen it, this is kind of like what it looks like. And so now we have this little bit of CSS. So we can go into app.js. Maybe I can put this on the side so we can see it at the same time. So we can go to app, we can go back into our app folder and we can import this module by doing import style from, or we can call this whatever we want, style, my styles, whatever you want to call it, from app.module.css. And so what styles will become, and this is kind of like a magic thing, you kind of have to accept the way it transitions. It will take every class name in here and it will make it a property, and this is an object. So inside of here, like let's say we want to make the title, the username red, we can do class name equals styles. So that was the object name dot my class name. So this comes straight from here, right? This name here gets converted into this name here. And then styles is the object that you refer to. So it's whatever you imported. So that's how you use modules. And if we do this, and we can see, boom, it's now red. Um, so that's CSS modules. And by the way, it is fancy enough to determine classes. And so if we name this the same thing, my class, bad naming, but whatever, and then we do color green, you'll notice that it's still red. And that's because it will know whether you're passing it into the class name or the ID. It's smart enough to detect the difference. So if you're passing it into the ID and you do styles.classname, it should be green now. There we go, it's green now. So it's smart enough to detect the difference even though you give them the same name. So that's just a side note on CSS modules. But yeah, I'm not going to use CSS through this tutorial, through the rest of this talk, but that's just kind of how you can incorporate some CSS into your, this is how you'll incorporate CSS, or my personal favorite way. If you were to use the classic like imports, so we can also just import this. The way that you would name those is because you don't have styles now, you would do the old way of naming hashtag my class name. And so this is the old version. So if you were using just CSS files, this is how you would do it. You would import it and then call it. We prefer CSS modules, and then like um, the Stormhacks webpage, we use CSS modules because it lets you clean up your code a lot more. And it shows that like these are just not, like this is, in my opinion, a magic string that we can avoid. So we'll go back to CSS modules and we'll save that. And then also images. So if we want to import an image, so how do we link an image? Because you can't just do so let's put an image at the top of our app here. So image, and self-closing, and then we can do src equals Well, what does this equal? What can we put here? You can't put a string because file path changed when you compile your code. So we need to put in a variable, and the variable we put in is we import something. So we can import my image source from, and then you can point to an image. So React comes with an image by default. This logo.svg is an image we can use. So we can import /logo.svg. And then if we shrink my component, so down here, we can just pass in this variable name. And that'll work. Oh, that didn't work at all. Oh, that did work. Okay, here we go. We got the beautiful React image at the top. And then the rest of our code here. So yeah, that's how you can import. So like, if I want to show this off, if I did this, the image doesn't work. It doesn't have the same path. Once you compile the code, it comes into a different path. So we need to import those. So that's how you can import image sources. Also, you might notice this yellow highlighting in React. It's almost standard to put a alt on images. So this is what gets showed up. React logo. So this is a text that gets showed up if the image source doesn't work. So let's forget about the source. So we can see the text here that shows up because the image didn't load. So yeah, that's a note on images and CSS, how you can incorporate those into your project. Any questions here? All right, cool. So yeah, we just did that. So now let's talk about single page web apps. So a single page app is an app that never refreshes. So you can kind of think about it like if you're on YouTube and you click on a YouTube video, it redirects you somewhere else, right? And then you have a refresh happen. So single page apps never refresh. They stay the same um, throughout the entire life cycle. So when you click on links that are internal, like let's say you click on an image, instead of redirecting you, that redirect will happen on the client. And the benefit of that is you don't have to wait for your network to download the new web page and stuff like that. And so in React, there is a non-official but should be official way to do that called React Router. And so if we go back to our command line and we close our production server for a second, inside of that same folder that we were at before, demo, wherever we started the server, we can do npm install React Router DOM. So this is a library for React that will let us create single page apps. So if we install that, that'll take a second to install. All right, cool. And then we can start up our server again so that we have it running in the background. So now let's create some pages. Again, these pages are completely controlled through you. So the first thing we need to do is import a bunch of stuff. So import, and what we're going to need to import is this import is pretty much standard. So I'm going to copy paste it. We'll see. So there's this browser reactor that we renamed to router or browser router. That you need to import that. Switch, root, and link. What was the install code here? I'll type it in the chat. npm install. Okay, so that's that. I put in chat if anyone needs to see it. So where are we importing these from? Well, React router DOM. So these imports all have a different purpose, and we'll go through those in a second. So in our app at the bottom here, we can, instead of doing this div shenanigans, let's comment that out for a second, and we can put a router at the top. And inside of that router, we can put a switch. So these components are all provided to you. We didn't create these, we imported these from a library. So this router is what controls the redirects. The switch gives you access to a bunch of different links. And then we can, inside of here, put the different links, which are called routes. So we can do a route here and then we can do path. So this is where you would type in into your browser to reach this point. So path, we can do slash profile. Sure. And then in here, we need to render a component. So into route, you pass a component that you want to render when they go to that web page. So this would be your kind of new app. So we can create a profile component here, and it'll take nothing in as a parameter, and it will return a div with a p tag in it, and we will do profile. So this is your profile page. And then we'll also have this link. So usually you do links with a tags, right? So for an SPA link, a link that doesn't redirect you, we will do a link component. Excuse me. So a link component again is imported from that library. So let's get rid of some of these so we can see everything. So that link is imported from the library, and then we can do to. So this is a prop, and it's called to, and this is where it'll link you, and then we'll do slash, which is our root, and we'll say go back to home page. And then similarly, we'll copy paste this, and we'll create a home page component. Home page. And then this link will go to profile. Oops. And we'll go to profile. And then here we'll type in homepage. Homepage. So yeah. And then so in here we can do profile. So we'll render the profile page if they're at slash profile, and then we will render. So if they're at slash nothing, so the root of your application, so that would be like www.stormhacks.com. That's the default endpoint. We will render not profile, we will render homepage. And if I did everything right and we reload the page, so here we go, we're at our home page. So we have homepage, and then we have this link that says go to profile. It's purple because I've probably visited localhost profile before. But if we watch it, watch this top nav bar right here. Look that it actually changes where you're getting redirected to. Boom, we're at slash profile, and now it loads the profile. And that's all happening through here. We're defining each route and defining what component renders that route. So these are kind of page components, right? They are a component that makes up an entire page. And so through this, you can create your entire website without ever refreshing. The only thing that happens is when you first download the web page, it might take a little bit longer because you're downloading all the pages. But it creates a really smooth transition between links. So links load instantaneously, or as fast as React can render, which is pretty damn fast. So yeah, we can kind of go back and forth here, and notice how it's changing, right? This is our nothing endpoint, and it's the home page. And we click on this, it goes to slash profile, and we can go back and forth. So yeah, that's one last note. A common mistake with React Router is it will go through this list top to bottom, find the first one that matches what you said, and go to that one. So if we put this at the top, this won't actually work. So we're at slash profile, and we can click this button as many times as we want. It will render homepage because technically a slash matches slash profile, or a slash profile matches a slash, right? The first character matches, and that's the only character, so it's done. So make sure that if you have a default root, which is this home page, that you put it at the bottom. So that's a common mistake. Just watch out for that. So that way all your routes work. So routes should pretty much in general get less and less specific as you go down. So like if you have another route which is like slash profile slash one, and then you have a different route that's like slash profile slash two, or it's just slash profile, make sure you're not overwriting previous routes. So this is how you can make SPAs, single page web apps, with your with a router and a very famous library, React router. So any questions about that? Okay, I think we're getting, so that was React routing. We just did that demo. So now so that's most of React. Now let's talk about a few pressure points, a few pain points. Also, my webcam might turn off at any second. It's a little bit glitchy right now. I just see a warning, so it might close. Anyway, so common pain points. How do you pass data to your parent? And we'll see all of these in a demo in the last few minutes here. Um, have the parent give you a state updater, and then they can set state, and then you can accept a new variable. So pass a function down that then they can call, and then you do the logic in your parent. Um, how do I use an array? Um, how do I use an array with state? So what you might notice is set state. By the way, when I say set state, I'm talking about this. Um, Whoops, I closed it. This is usually called, if you don't know the name of it, it's usually it's called the set state function, because it is setting the state, right? We change it here to be whatever the name is, but by convention this is called set state. So if you might notice that set state, or whatever your variable is, and then a new, or the same array that you like push something into or remove something from, won't work. And that's because pointers and references and detailed JavaScript implementation. How do you fix it? You kind of you break JavaScript. You say create a new array, and this is called the spread operator, with all of the items in the old array. And so why does this work? It creates a new pointer to a new array. So anyway, this is a common hack that you'll see in React, which is at this point you see it so much it's not even called a hack. It's just how you use state with an array. Same thing for object, you just change it to curly braces, and then you're saying create a new object with all the same properties as my original object. So that's a common pain point. That's just something to learn. So one thing to worry about, cycle dependencies. So if, let's say we have this use effect, remember it takes a function and a dependency array. And so what this code is doing, it's saying every time k changes, go ahead and change k for me. And you might notice that's a cycle right here. And so what this will do is this will very quickly um, slow your browser down to its absolute grind, because it will re-render at around 100,000 times per second, or as fast as your computer can let it. And then yeah, you'll cause infinite recursion, and nobody wants that. Your phones might crash. Nothing good. How do you render an array? There's an array.map property that we'll see in a second. Um, and then you might have this, I can't point at the bottom ones, but I'm reading the second to last point. Your state isn't re-rendering. Make sure you're using set state and you're not changing the variable itself. Remember my pro tip, use const, so you can't change the variable itself. You have to use set state to update it. And how do you add fonts? Let's go through that real quick. How can you add a font? So you go to Google Fonts. This is a really common website. You can just you literally just type in Google Fonts, and it'll be the first link. So this is a very common website, and then you search up the font you want. So we'll search up Poppins, and then you click on it, and then you find the style you want. 400 is the default style, by the way, 400 regular. So then you click the style, and you can click on other styles too. And then you click this little button at the top here that hides your export, and it'll give you this link on these two things. And you don't even think about what these mean. You copy them, and then you go back to your code base. And so there's a different folder here called public. So this isn't source, it's public. And inside of it, there's this index.html, and inside of here, it looks like an empty web page. That's because it is. That's the point of React. But right at the top, at the head here, you just paste them in, paste the two links in. You don't even care what they mean. They'll magically make the fonts work. And then inside of your CSS, you can do font family, and then whatever you just imported, Poppins for us. So that's how you can import fonts. Just a quick note about that. But yeah, let's go to the final slide. Let's finish the messages. So let's add. So the only thing left for messages is to create a new message. So let's go through that real quick. We can get rid of all this routing stuff and go back to our old demo. So to create a new message, let's create a component. Call it const create message. And this will be a component. It will take props. It will take something from its parent, and it will return. So let's talk about what it will return first. We need an input box. That's what the user is going to type a message into. And so here we'll do placeholder message, and then we need its on change. So on change is an event that'll get called every time you change every time the whatever you typed in changes. So every backspace, every new key is pressed, this on change will get called. And what do we pass in? Let's create a function, handle change, um, and it will take in an input event. This will become relevant in a second. We'll need event, and also we need a state. So again, let's use const cur message, or we'll use MSG just for shorthand, and set cur MSG equals to use state. And what do we want the default state? An empty arrow or empty bracket. Why is this giving me an error? That's because ignore that error. It doesn't know that this is a component yet. So we'll call useState, and then so in here we'll do set current message. So we're changing the state, and what are we setting it to? Event.target. So this is the thing that caused the event. So that would be the input, and dot value. So this thing will have a property called value, which is the current value. And then so in here we'll do handle change. And so now we can put this in here, create, oh, sorry, this should be a capital. Remember, this is Pascal case for components, and that's why that error was showing up. So create message, and then so it needs a prop. We'll get into that prop in a second. Let's just make sure what we got is working right now. So yeah, here we go. We have the message, and then you also need a way to submit that message. So let's create a div and put that input in it. And then we'll also put let's put this back here. And we'll put a button here that says create message. And so we need to capture its on click handler. And so now we need another function. So let's call it const create new message. And this will be a function. And so this time we don't need the event. We don't care. So we can just leave it blank. And then so here we need to do something. What is current message? So current message is just it's a variable. We can actually see what current message is, console.log. Current message is a state. We can print that at the top. So anyway, so in here, we'll say to do for now, and we'll go look at that print. So every time we press a key, you will notice we're printing the new value. So, and if we delete, it keeps printing. So we're keeping track of whatever the user has typed into here. And you may be thinking, wow, that's a lot of rendering. It's not even like experts can only type a couple hundred words per second, and React can handle tens of thousands of renders per second. So we're good on that front. So here, so this is where we need to tell our parent, like, hey, we need more than one message. So can you do something about that? So here in the parent, we can create a new state, which will be a list of all the messages. And then a way to update that, set messages. And this will be use state. And we start as an empty array. There's no messages by default. So inside of here, so now let's pass this set message down to our child. So create message can take a prop called on create, and we will pass it this set message thing. And so actually, sorry, we'll pass it a create handle, or sorry, handle create. So we'll write a new function called const handle create, and it will take in a new message, message, and it will do messages dot push new message, and then we'll pass in this handle create down to here. So now inside of here, this props has a on create function, so we can go into here and do props dot on create, which is a function we pass down. So remember, where does this word come from? It comes from here, right? We said on create equals to this. So in here we can do props.onCreate. So that's kind of how they link up together. So props.onCreate, and we'll pass in the message. And then just because we're fancy, we'll also, oh, sorry, no, let's avoid being fancy for now. We might run out of time. So now, theoretically, when we type a new message and we click create, we should see, oh, sorry, I didn't fill this in. Create new message. So yeah, when the one gets clicked, we should call this function, which we'll call our parent function. So let's try that again. Okay, well, nothing's happening really. That's a real shame. Why is nothing happening? Well, first of all, if we because we're not rendering these messages, so how can we render an array of messages? Remember, that's a common pain point. We can use messages.map, which is a function that JavaScript provides you. This is not React, this is JavaScript. And we can take each message and we can return a votable message with user, and let's close that off so it stops complaining to me. And then we'll pass in message equals MSG. So this is a function that will return this thing. So there's an invisible return here. If you guys aren't familiar with arrow functions, there's this little invisible return here if there's only one line in an arrow function. And then we'll just set the username to be our friendly neighborhood pilot for every message. So now we're rendering every message, and we should be able to disable this. And so by default, if we refresh the page, we'll see no message. And if we click create, it's still not working. What's going on? Remember, we can't change a variable. We have to change its state. So set state dot messages. Remember this shorthand. If you just pass in messages again, it ain't gonna work because it's the same pointer, so it's not technically changed. So you need to pass in a new array with all the messages in it. So now hopefully, when we click this, we can see a new message. And if we add another one, we'll see a new message, and another one, and we'll see a new message. And each of these have their own like counter. So that's the, components can keep their logic separate from each other. And so we covered a few pain points there at the near the end here. So this is setting an array of objects in a set state. We have passing data up. So this create message is a child of our app, which controls the list of messages. So how do we tell that guy, hey, we got a new message? Can you do something with it? So we have this, we passed in a function that this guy can call, that the child can call, and then we accept the data. So data usually only travels down in props, so this is a way to go back up. Yeah, I think that's all the pressure points. I guess just to kind of leave us off on, we can create another we can do the nuking our app. So set k equals use state 0, and then use effect set k plus 1, and we'll do this every time k changes, and then we'll render k on the page just so we can see it. And there we go. K is now rendering as fast as it can. I have a lot of software open, so that's why it might be a little bit slow right now. But yeah, that's it. That's everything. And we can see React is trying to tell us like, hey, what the hell are you doing? But anyway, that's the presentation. If you guys have any questions, we can go to that. Any final question? This warning? So this is a cycle dependency. It's saying max update depth. So every time you cause an update, it goes down one depth. It's kind of like recursion, right? If you think about, if you create an infinite recursion in Python or something, your program will eventually crash and say maximum recursion reached. So this is the same thing. It's saying maximum updates reached. So this is saying, this warning is saying you have a cycle somewhere. So yeah, this is that, and of course the cycle is right here. We're saying every time k changes, change k. So yeah, React will try and tell you not to do certain things, but it'll never stop you from doing certain things. And in case you guys are wondering why the hell would React ever allow this, it actually used to not, but they started allowing it because now you can test, you can benchmark an app pretty much and see how quickly your app is re-rendering. So this is re-rendering at around, I don't know, 1,000 times per second, which is 1,000 FPS. So that's pretty fast. And so like if this reaches below 60 FPS, you're kind of not doing great. But yeah, it's 8 p.m. It's officially over. If you guys want to leave, please leave. If you guys have more questions at the end, you can stay back and listen or ask. And then I will also stop the recording. So if you want to voice questions, you can also do that.